There were 7 of us at the Thanksgiving table that year, and I already knew which 4 of them had come, not to celebrate but to collect. My son sat at the far end, cutting his turkey with the focused precision of a man who had rehearsed this dinner in his head many times. His wife sat beside him, her posture rigid, her smile the kind that never quite reaches the eyes. Her parents, a couple I had met exactly 3 times before they moved into my guest room, were already on their 2nd glass of wine before the stuffing was passed around. And then there was my daughter, who had driven 4 hours from Kingston and was watching everything the way I was watching everything, quietly, carefully waiting. I am 67 years old. I spent 32 years as a structural engineer, mostly in Ontario, mostly on projects that are still standing. I am not a man who panics. I am a man who reads the load-bearing points of a structure and plans accordingly. What I saw at that table was a structure that was about to fail. My son, I will call him by his name, Elliot, had changed over the previous 2 years in ways I had tried to explain away. The entitlement I once thought was a phase had calcified into something harder. His wife, Renata, had a talent for identifying what a person valued most and finding ways to make them feel guilty for keeping it. Her parents, Hugh and Sylvia, had arrived from their rental in Brampton 6 weeks earlier with 3 suitcases and a sense of permanent arrival that no one had authorized. And somewhere in those 6 weeks, my house, the house I built equity in for 29 years, the house where I raised 2 children after their mother passed, had started to feel like it belonged to someone else. I want to be honest about something. I had seen this coming, not every detail, not the specific cruelty of how Elliot would eventually act, but the general shape of it. A man who has spent his career calculating structural failure learns to recognize stress fractures before they become collapses. I had started making calls in September. My lawyer, a woman in Barrie named Catherine Hollis, was already briefed. The documents I needed were already prepared. I had even, with some embarrassment, installed a small security camera in the living room bookshelf, the kind that looks like a router and records to a cloud server. I want to be honest about something else. None of that preparation made Thanksgiving dinner any easier to sit through. It was Renata who started it, the way she always started things, sideways with sweetness. She mentioned how fortunate it was that Hugh and Sylvia had found such a comfortable arrangement. How family should take care of family. How the house had so much space, really, more than one person needed. She said this looking not at me but at Elliot, the way you cue an actor for their line. Elliot set down his fork. "Dad," he said, "we've been meaning to talk to you about something." I picked up my glass of water and took a slow sip. I said nothing. Renata's parents have been having a hard time. The lease on their place in Brampton is up in January. We were thinking, and this is just a conversation, that maybe they could stay on here for a while. Longer term, there's the whole lower level sitting empty. My daughter Simone went very still beside me. I looked at Elliot, then at Hugh and Sylvia, who were studying their plates with the theatrical innocence of people pretending not to overhear a conversation they had written. Then I looked back at Elliot. "We can talk about that another time," I said. "Dad, another time, Elliot." The table went quiet. Renata's jaw tightened. Hugh refilled his wineglass without being invited to. Sylvia said something about the cranberry sauce being homemade, and did I make it myself? I said yes. She said it was wonderful. The conversation moved on, thin and brittle as ice on a November puddle. Later that evening, after Simone had gone to bed in her old room and Hugh and Sylvia had retreated downstairs, Elliot knocked on my study door. He came in without waiting for an answer and sat down across from me without being asked. "I don't think you understand how serious this is," he said. "I understand it fine. They have nowhere to go, Dad. Renata is stressed. I'm stressed. This whole thing has been Elliot." I set down my pen. "Your in-laws' housing situation is not my responsibility. I'm sorry they're struggling, but this is my home." He looked at me the way he used to look at me as a teenager when he felt I was being deliberately obtuse. You have a whole lower level. You rattle around this place alone. It seems selfish. It really does. That word, selfish. I noted it. I had heard it before from him in other contexts, always deployed at moments when he wanted something, and I had declined to provide it. "I'll think about it," I said, which was a lie, and we both knew it. What I actually did was call Catherine the next morning and tell her I believed the timeline had moved up. December was a quiet escalation. Small things began disappearing from the common areas. A ceramic piece from the mantel that had belonged to my wife. A set of silver cufflinks I had left on the hallway console. I documented each one. I said nothing. Hugh had taken to coming upstairs without asking, making himself coffee, watching television in the living room as though it were a lounge. Sylvia reorganized my kitchen cupboards one afternoon while I was out and seemed genuinely surprised when I asked her not to. Renata called Simone twice to discuss Dad's isolation, and Simone called me both times to report the conversation, word for word. "What are you doing about this?" Simone asked me in January, her voice low and careful the way it always gets when she is trying not to show how frightened she is. "Everything I need to do," I said. "Trust me. I do trust you. I just want to know. The less you know right now, the better. For everyone." She was quiet for a moment. "You already have a plan." "I've had a plan since October." The conflict arrived in earnest on a Saturday in early February. Elliot showed up at the house mid-morning without calling ahead. He was carrying a manila envelope. Renata was with him. They sat down at the kitchen table, and he slid the envelope across to me with the careful deliberateness of a man who has practiced the gesture. Inside was a legal document, a petition for a capacity assessment, the kind used in Ontario when someone believes a family member is no longer able to manage their own property or personal care. It cited what it called behavioral changes, isolation, failure to maintain property, and financial mismanagement. Attached was a letter from a doctor I had never heard of, at a clinic in Mississauga I could not find when I later searched online. I read it twice. Then I set it down on the table, face up, and looked at my son. "This is how you want to do this," I said. It was not a question. "Dad, this isn't," Renata started. "I'm talking to my son." Elliot met my eyes for exactly 2 seconds before looking down at the table. "I'm worried about you," he said. "This house the way you've been. You've had this document prepared by a physician who has never examined me, at a clinic with no verifiable address, in order to have me declared incapable of managing my own affairs, so that you could manage them for you." I paused. I want to make sure I understand what's happening. "Dad, do you want to know what I did in October?" He blinked. "I updated my will. I placed this property and my investment accounts into a revocable trust administered by Catherine Hollis. I also assigned her durable power of attorney for property, meaning that even if a capacity assessment were somehow to succeed, which it would not, given that I have already completed a voluntary psychological assessment through my family doctor at Barry General, which I would be happy to produce, she, not you, would manage my affairs. I folded my hands on the table. "I also want you to know that this kitchen has been on camera since November." The silence in that room was not the comfortable silence of a family. Renata stood up, her chair scraped loud against the tile. "This is insane," she said. "You've been treating us like criminals. You've been treating my home like an inheritance you're waiting to collect," I said. "Sit down, Renata." She did not sit down. She grabbed her coat and walked out. She did not sit down. She grabbed her coat and walked out. Elliot sat very still, staring at the document on the table. "The silver pieces," I said. "The cufflinks. The antique compass that was on the bookshelf." He looked up. "Those were your grandfather's things, and I have footage of them leaving this house." I slid a folded piece of paper across the table. Not a document, just the address of a police division in Barrie. You have until the end of the week to return everything. After that, it becomes a police matter. I want to be very clear that I don't want it to become a police matter. But I will let it." Elliot stood up slowly. He looked older than I'd ever seen him look. There was something I had hoped, until quite recently, would soften in him. Something I had been watching for since Renata entered his life and, honestly, since before that. It wasn't there. I had spent a long time wondering where I had failed. That Saturday morning in my kitchen, I finally stopped. "Get your in-laws out of my lower level by the 1st of March, I said. "Give them a month's notice if you want, I'll allow that. But they leave on March 1st. He left without saying anything. The items came back on a Thursday, left inside the door in a cardboard grocery box while I was out getting my hair cut. No note. March 1st came and went. Hugh and Sylvia left with the same 3 suitcases they'd arrived with, plus several things that were not theirs, which I documented but chose not to pursue. Some battles are not worth the cost. They moved in with a cousin of Sylvia's in Orangeville, and I have not heard from them since. What came next was something I had not fully prepared for emotionally, even if I had prepared for it in every legal sense. Elliot filed a complaint against Catherine with the Law Society, claiming she had manipulated me into the trust arrangement. The complaint was reviewed and dismissed within 6 weeks. He then contacted my bank, BMO, where I've held accounts for 31 years, and told them he had reason to believe I was being financially exploited. The bank placed a temporary flag on 2 of my accounts while they investigated. I produced my voluntary assessment, my legal documents, and a letter from my family physician. The flag was removed in 9 days. During those 9 days, I drove to Kingston and stayed with Simone. I want to be honest about that period too. I was not made of stone, sitting in my daughter's spare room, watching her move around her small house, watching her make tea without asking if I wanted any because she already knew. I felt something I had been holding at arm's length for months. I had been so focused on the architecture of the problem, the documents, the camera, the contingencies, that I had not fully let myself feel the grief of what the situation actually was. My son had tried to have me declared mentally unfit. He had tried to take my home. He had stood in my kitchen and called it concern. Simone found me at her kitchen table at 2 a.m. and sat down across from me without turning on the overhead light. "I know," she said. "I didn't think he'd actually do it," I said. "I know, Dad." We sat there for a while in the dark. She reached across and put her hand over mine, and we didn't say anything else, and that was the right thing. I returned to Barry in the 2nd week of March. The house was quiet in a way it hadn't been since October, and the quiet was a relief that surprised me with its intensity. I made my own coffee. I put the ceramic piece back on the mantel. I found the antique compass and put it back on the bookshelf next to a photograph of my wife taken the summer we drove up to Algonquin Park and got caught in a thunderstorm and had to eat all our sandwiches in the car. The complaint against Catherine was dismissed. The bank flag was removed. The capacity petition, without a legitimate medical examination, went nowhere. The document Elliot had produced was eventually flagged as potentially fraudulent by the Law Society Review. I was told this by Catherine in a measured, professional tone that nonetheless contained a quiet satisfaction I understood completely. I did not pursue a fraud claim. Catherine advised that I could and that it had merit. I thought about it for 2 weeks and decided against it. What I wanted was not to destroy my son. What I wanted was for this to be finished. What I did do in April was sign the paperwork to sell a commercial property I had held in Innisfil for 12 years, a small industrial unit I'd bought when prices were reasonable, and the market in that corridor was just beginning to move. The proceeds, after capital gains, came to a number that surprised even me. I took a portion of it and established a scholarship fund at Lakehead University in my wife's name for students in engineering. It felt like the right use for it. The rest I structured into the trust, managed by Catherine, to be distributed in a manner I have specified, and which Elliot will not learn the details of until the time comes. Simone knows some of it. She is not asked about the rest, which tells me she has more of her mother in her than I sometimes give her credit for. It is May now. The backyard is coming back. The lilac bush my wife planted along the fence is about to open, same as it does every year, indifferent to everything that has happened. I have been eating dinner outside when the weather allows. There is a retired teacher who moved in 2 houses down last fall, a widower named Gerald, who comes by on Thursdays, and we watch the hockey game and disagree about most things and agree about enough things. It is a small life, and I am not saying that as a complaint. Elliot has not called. I have not called him. I do not know what the next chapter of that looks like, and for the first time in a long time, I am willing to wait and find out rather than engineer the outcome in advance. Some structures you build, some you simply watch and see what holds. I know what I am worth. I know what this house is. I know who belongs in it. And I have the footage to prove all of it. The lilac bush along my back fence opened last week. Same as it does every May. Same as it did the year my wife planted it. Same as it will long after I'm gone. I stood at the kitchen window with my coffee and looked at it for a long time. I'd been thinking about what actually happened over those months. Not the legal mechanics of it, not the documents and the camera footage and the trust agreements, but the thing underneath all of it. The reason any of it was necessary in the first place. Elliot did not become the person he became overnight. I know that. I was there for the whole of it. The years I worked late and told myself I'd be more present next month. The times I solved his problems with money instead of conversation. The ways I let certain things go unchallenged, because challenging them felt like more conflict than I had the energy for. I'm not saying I caused what he did. I'm not. But I'm also not willing to stand in my own kitchen at 67 and pretend I had no part in shaping the conditions. That kind of honesty is uncomfortable. It's also, I've come to believe, the only kind worth having. What saved me was not luck. It was the habit, built over decades of engineering work, of looking clearly at a situation before deciding what to do about it. Not what I wished the situation was, not what would have been convenient. What it actually was. When I saw the stress fractures in October, I didn't tell myself I was imagining things. I called Catherine. I made the trust. I installed the camera. I did those things not because I wanted to believe the worst of my son, but because I had learned, the hard way, that clarity is a form of protection for everyone involved, including the people you're protecting yourself from. There is something I want to say about Simone too. She sat across from me at 2 in the morning in her kitchen in Kingston, in the dark, and she didn't try to fix it. She just put her hand over mine. That is its own kind of wisdom, knowing when a person doesn't need solutions, only company. I raised both of my children. One of them learned somewhere along the way that the world owed him comfort. The other learned that showing up quietly without fanfare is sometimes the most important thing a person can do. I don't fully understand how that divergence happened. I suspect I never will. What I do know is this: the capacity to act with integrity when it costs you something, when it would be easier to look away, to give in, to tell yourself the problem will sort itself out. That capacity doesn't appear on its own. It has to be practiced. Every time you make the harder, more honest choice, you're building something. And every time you avoid it, you're eroding something. Elliot spent 2 years making small erosions. The capacity petition was just where they accumulated. I am not angry at him anymore. I don't say that to sound noble. I say it because it's true, and because the anger was exhausting, and because I have a backyard with a lilac bush in it, and a Thursday hockey game with Gerald, and a scholarship in my wife's name at Lakehead, and I would rather spend whatever time I have tending to those things than carrying a grievance that has already been resolved by the facts. The house is mine. My mind is sound. The footage exists. That was always going to be enough.